Hello guys, welcome back. We are at a very exciting time in Disney Lorcana where all of the cards have been spoiled, all the cards are online, and we have made some updates to some of our old decks as well as brought you some new decks with the brand new cards. Some of the old strategies that were almost playable now have all the cards for them, and we are very excited to bring those to you. We're going to kick this off with one of our favorite decks, Hades Villains. All right, so we're just gonna get right into the deck. So this is called Hades Villain. So believe it or not, we're playing some Hades. We've got two different Hades here. This 8-mana Hades is the main win condition for the deck, but we're gonna go over the small Hades first because he plays an integral role. So this is a 4-mana card that cannot be inked for 3 power and 2 health. It says, when you play this character, return a card from your discard to your hand. So this is quite useful for getting some of your villains that are already dead back into your hand. You can also try to loop your Hades. If you end up with 2 Hades, they can loop themselves infinitely when they die, which is very, very useful for you to play and very annoying for your opponent to try to get rid of, especially if they're on a steel deck or a very aggro deck. Next up, we've got the 8-mana Hades, also uninkable, which is a little annoying because you do have to play 4 of each of these. He's got a lot bigger power toughness, so he's got 6 and 7. He's still only quests for 1, but he can shift 6, so we can play Hades on turn 4, then on turn 6, shift this Hades right on top of him, and then we can immediately start questing with him because this character gets +1 lore for each other villain character you have in play. So this is where the main synergy of the deck is going to come in. We're going to be playing, ideally, a bunch of villains throughout the game, play Hades on 4, maybe return one of the low-cost villains to our hand, play a couple villains on 5, then on 6, play this Hades and quest for like 5, 6, maybe even 7 lore. Since our 4-mana Hades, our low Hades, has already been on the board, when we shift our big Hades on top of him, he can go ahead and start questing immediately or attacking if the board needs it. But typically you're just going to be kind of stalling out, controlling your opponent's board in the early game until you can slam the big Hades and just win in like 2 or 3 turns with the amount of lore that he's able to make. So that's those guys. Next up, we've got our Dr. Facilier. So these guys are useful to an extent. They're a bit of board control, a bit of filtering, a bit of late game as well. So this Facilier is a 2-mana Facilier. It is inkable, which is quite nice, especially since these guys are uninkable. Got 0 attack, 4 health, and he's got Challenger 2. So while he's attacking, he becomes a 2/4. A 2/4 for 2 is quite strong. One of our more aggressive villains that we are able to use to try and control our opponent's board in the early game while we try to establish a bunch of villains. Next up, we've got the 3-mana Facilier, also inkable, which is quite nice. 2/4, just base stat line, don't have to worry about our Challenger. But then also, whenever we play a song, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one on top of the deck and the other on the bottom. This is very useful for filtering to find our Hades. If this deck doesn't find big Hades, it has a decently hard time winning the game. That big Hades is the main win condition, so we do need to find it. We're also playing a couple songs that can help with further filtering, and so if you have this Facilier on board, then you can keep filtering throughout the entire time. This Facilier is very strong. He is able to sing, I believe, all of our songs, and he does not have to be untapped in order to use his ability. So most of the time, we're either using him to attack, to clear the board with a 2/4 stat line, or using him to sing our songs and continue filtering to look for our Hades. Next up, we've got 2 of Big Facilier. This is a 7-mana uninkable, which is why we're only playing 2 of it because it shifts onto our other Faciliers. Playing these Hades as well, you really don't want to be playing a bunch of high-cost guys that are uninkable because then they get stuck in your hand in the early game and you kind of just lose too much board tempo to the point where even if you do manage to stick the big cost guys, you do end up just losing the game because you can't catch up fast enough. He is a 4/5, keeping our decent stat line going. He shifts 5, so we can do a turn 2 Facilier or a turn 3 Facilier, followed by a turn 4 Hades, a turn 5 Facilier, and then a turn 6 big Hades. So the curve does work out quite nicely for these guys. I like them being played together very much. He does quest for 3 lore, so that can help us catch back up even if we don't have big Hades on board. 3 lore is quite a lot. And whenever one of your other characters is banished in a challenge, you may return that card to your hand. So this helps if you're able to stick this Facilier before you're about to play big Hades. Even if they try to kill your whole board, they're just going to all return back to hand. You can commit them back to the board before slamming your big Hades and then start questing for game. So that's very nice. Next up, we've got some card filtering on more villains. We've got a 2-mana Yzma that is inkable for a 2/2. 2/2 for 2 stat line is very nice. And whenever this character quests, you look at the top card of your deck, put it either on bottom or top of the deck. Again, these are just going to be our card filtering package to help dig for Hades. They also all happen to be villains, which is quite nice. Next up, we've got the 3-mana Maleficent, also a 2/2. Stat line's not ideal, but whenever you play this character, you may draw a card. So as soon as it hits the board, it's already replacing itself, already getting value. Even if your opponent has to commit even 1 card to killing this thing with something like cannons or smash or just attacking into it, if you're able to trade back, or if you're able to commit the attack into one of their 2/2s or one of their 1/1s, even better. This card just goes crazy in card advantage, also helping with our filtering to get to our Hades. Next up, we've got the Queen, 5 mana, also inkable for a 4/5. Pretty respectable stat line for a 5 mana card, quite strong. And also it says exert itself to draw a card. Can quest for 1, but typically we're going to be using that draw card. Again, if you get this ability off even once, it plays very similarly to Maleficent. You do have to tap it, which means that it's not going to happen the very first turn, but its 5 health is going to keep it out of range of a lot of the gray or the steel damage dealing cards. And if your opponent has to commit a let it go into this, then it'll go straight into your Inkwell. That'll help you cast your Hades even faster or your Facilier even faster. If they have to commit a Dragonfire to it, you've still 1-for-1 them, not the end of the world. If you got Facilier on board, or if you can draw to Hades later, you can get it back. Very, very nice. This deck is all about getting a bunch of card advantage, keeping cards in your hand, because we have to play these very high cost cards. We don't have a very big ramp package because there's almost no villains in blue. Well, to round out our villains a little bit more, we've just got the 1 mana Maleficent. These are just our generic villains that are just high value cards that are just good names, good villains. So there's a 1 mana 1/1 with Maleficent. It's inkable. Quest for 2, no effect, but the questing for 2 can help catch up in the early game, keep a little pressure on the opponent. Next up, we've got 4 mana Jafar. He's also inkable, 4 mana for a 2/5. He challenges +3, so he challenges as a 5/5. So a 4 mana 5/5 is incredibly strong. This goes along with our small 2 mana Facilier to help control the board, make sure that our opponent's not able to attack into too many of our villains since we're hitting them first. Next up, we got the other 4 mana Jafar, a 0/5 for 4 mana, also inkable, quite nice. And this character gets +1 attack for each card in your hand. This is where our card filtering and our card draw package comes in to make sure that this guy is not just doing nothing. But even worst case scenario, he still quests for 2. He's a little bit too expensive if you're not going to be able to make him have any attack. Don't really like this guy at 0 cards in hand, but we do need more villains, and this deck almost never has no cards in hand because of the amount of recursion from Hades, the card draw from these guys, and some card draw from other cards like Friends on the Other Side. Our first 3 mana song. A reminder that all songs can be cast for free by tapping a character or by exerting a character that has mana value, ink value 3 or more. Friends on the Other Side here says draw 2 cards. Very simple, replaces itself, gets you another card. Incredibly powerful if you're able to sing it, especially with somebody like our 3 mana Facilier. With this 3 mana Facilier, you can stack this ability however you like. So you can use Facilier to exert him to sing Friends on the Other Side. Then since you've played the song, he can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 on top, put 1 on bottom. Then the Friends on the Other Side will resolve, and you'll get to draw 2 cards. So you can make sure that you're drawing the cards that you want. So dig a little bit deeper for the Hades before you get the card draw, or make sure that you're not drawing cards that are not ideal for the situation you're in. Very, very useful synergy combo there. Next up, we've also got Be Our Guest, very similar in style to Friends on the Other Side. It is a 2 mana song, so almost everybody in the deck can sing it. The only exception is the 1 mana Maleficent, but everybody, including our 3 mana Facilier, can do it, and our 2 mana Facilier if it's in the mid to late game and that challenger is not very useful. It says look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal a character and put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. You can do this with the 3 mana Facilier to look at the top 2. If you see that one of them or even both of them are not characters that you want, you can put 1 of them on the bottom, 1 on top, and then dig 4 deeper to try and find your Hades, is mostly what you're going to be looking for in this deck. Next up, we've got our item package. The lanterns here is incredibly powerful. This card cannot be inked, and so it does add to our cannot be inked count, but this card basically doesn't matter that it can't be inked. It says exert itself. You may pay 1 less than the next character you play this turn. Items are not affected by summoning sickness or needing to dry their ink, so you can use them the turn that they come out, which is very, very nice. On turn 2, you can play a lantern, then play the 1 mana Maleficent, or on turn 3, if you already have the lantern out, you can play a turn 3 Hades. This also synergizes really, really well with both our Facilier and our Hades. If we are able to stick a lantern in the early game, we can go turn 4 Hades, and then this mana does reduce the shift cost of our big shifters, so we can go turn 4 Hades, bring something back that died in the early game, then use the lantern to play this Hades on turn 5 immediately after we committed the first Hades. Don't even give our opponent much of a chance to respond to killing our Hades. Same things happens with this Facilier. You can do the 3 mana Facilier, then on turn 4, play the 7 mana Facilier. And then on turn 4, you have a 4/5 that quests for 3, and whenever your opponents kill your things, they bounce back to hand. That sounds like you're winning the game to me. I don't know about you. This card cannot be inked, but again, it doesn't matter because it makes mana, so it doesn't matter. It can only be made for characters, but all of these are characters. We play so many characters because we're trying to max out on all of the villains that we really want to be playing in this deck, and so this is almost always just free mana. Next up, we've got Ursula's Cauldron, another card that can't be inked. It is an item, and it says exert it to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one on the top of your deck and the other on the bottom. So this is very similar to our 3-mana Facilier's effect, but it's just on a tap ability. And since this doesn't cost any mana, we're okay with playing multiples because we are okay seeing multiples. It is not ideal that it can't be inked. I would prefer this card be inked, but you know what? I prefer every card in the game could be inked. And this just helps with so much card filtering. Multiples of these is so strong for just being able to turbo through your deck and try to guarantee to find your Hades, find your friends on the other side, find your Be Our Guest, find your Lanterns, just finds anything in the entire deck. Incredibly powerful. And to round it out, we've got 2 White Rabbit's Pocket Watch. The idea is that you're going to be shifting your big Hades and your big Facilier onto your smaller characters, but that's not always going to be the case, especially if once your opponent picks up on what you're doing. Hades only has 2 health. Our Faciliers have 4 health, which is a little bit better, but the Hades tend to die to cannons and smash quite easily, and at least our small Facilier is going to be getting into combat, so he's going to have some damage marked on him. Ideally, we can keep our 3-mana Facilier out of combat, but he's a very, very good value engine. Our opponents will be attacking into him when we use him to sync with our cards or just a quest. So we do want to have the option to allowing us to just win the game on our when our opponent can't even respond to us. So this card says exert and pay 1 mana. Chosen character gains rush this turn, which means they can challenge the turn that they're played. So we can, if we have an empty board or if we have a bunch of villains on board and we have 9 mana, which with all the card draw in this deck and how late game we are trying to go with the board control and with the card draw, that's not impossible to do. We can just play a Hades, give it rush with this, and quest it for 1,000,000 lore right away. That's the goal there. Same with the Facilier. We can get the Facilier into combat. We can get the Jafar into combat once we've got a big hand, and the Facilier can quest for 3 if we're doing that. That's the game plan with these guys. Don't want to play a lot of these because it does take a mana, and once you have one on board, the second one doesn't really do much. You're typically not going to be able to play multiple characters in the same turn while also having the extra mana to give them all rush and have it still be relevant to your board state, so we don't want to see too many. It is inkable, so if you see the second one, you can still ink it, which is not too bad, but maybe there's an excuse to run this up to 3 and the Ursula's Cauldron down to 3. Personally, I value the card selection over the rush anyways. The rush is kind of a little like add-in on the top, whereas I like the card selection a lot more in this deck. And that is Hades Villains. It is a all-in combo deck. I'm trying to play as many villains as possible. There's a lot of villains in every color except for in Amber. These are the only villains in these colors, so you do have to branch out into another color. As you see, we are playing very, very few Amber cards for this reason. I believe these are the only Amber cards in the deck. And that is because there's just not a lot of villains in Amber. The purple has a lot of villains in it. There's 10 different villains in Amethyst. Every other color has about 5 to 6 villains. But I like what the purple villains are doing with card selection, with recursion, with card draw, and with more card draw on Friends on the Other Side, and things like the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch is very, very, very useful. So I prefer the Amethyst package. There is a reason to go into the green color, I'm blanking on the name right now, because there is a little bit more villain support in there, but the villains cards in there themselves, the actual villain characters, I think are a lot weaker. And so in my opinion, the Amethyst Amber Villains deck is the way to go. And that is our deck list for the Hades Villains. Keep an eye on the channel. We've had a couple other Lorcana deck lists in the past, and now that all the cards are out, they're all getting big updates, baby. So keep your eye on the channel for that. We'll have a bunch more Lorcana content coming to you. We have a bunch of deck lists, have a bunch of gameplay, have some pack openings when we get those. Just keep your eyes on the channel for that, and we will see you guys in the next video. Peace.
Yeah.